Katerina, he has not, and I'll get Stephen's viewpoint obviously on this because that's his expertise, but your thoughts on his relationship with Mr. Putin?
I think it's a very difficult one because U.S.-Russian relations are at a difficult point. I do think that what we saw in August, Larry, was an extraordinary moment when we saw the possibility of a renewed U.S.-Russian relationship because of finding a non-military alternative to Syria, the chemical weapons issue in Syria. And we still don't know the full story, but there's no question that whether it was Putin or Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, that the Russians played a critical role in extricating the United States from what I believe could have been a terribly damaging military strike policy in Syria. What strikes me, Larry, and the nation has been for 148 years for seeking non-military alternatives to conflict. And it strikes me that we should be making more of how we can dismantle and destroy weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons without war, because one of the great debacles in my mind, Larry, and the nation was one of the few media outlets to oppose the Iraq War in 2003, is that we need in this current time to find non-military alternatives. So the U.S.-Russian relationship is going through difficult times. Steve will say more, but as you look at NATO expansion, which is so off the radar in this country's discussion, from the Russian perspective, they ask, after the end of the Cold War, why do we need this NATO expansion? Why can't we find new ways of relating and respecting the dignity of each country? Obviously, Russia has internal problems. Personally, as someone who spent many years in the 80s and 90s, working on Russian women's feminist movements, U.S. ties to those, to see Russia regress in terms of women's rights, LGBT rights, has been painful to watch. But, you know, each country finds its own way, Larry, and we found our own way and our own rights through social movements.
All right, Stephen, what's your view of the relationship?
Well, I hope you don't mind the reference point, Larry, but you and I have been through decades of this. When I was on your broadcast many, many years ago, when it was still the Cold War, we were discussing similar issues. So we have to ask ourselves, in what sense did the Cold War really end with the Soviet Union? And I have a very harsh opinion of the way the American mainstream media, particularly the print media, has reacted to Russia since the end of the Soviet Union. I think it's been, in some ways, less objective and less balanced than the American media was during the Cold War. One of the aspects of that has been this utter demonization of Russian President Putin. Now, he is not a Democrat. He is authoritarian. But this presentation of him as some kind of Stalin or Saddam, as a bloodthirsty, imperialistic man, simply doesn't match his record in 13 years.
What do we do?
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, there are the financial solutions, number one, but I think the reason I wrote this book is I think this is really both a political and an emotional problem. And the problem politically is you have a very large aging population. Demographically, there are 40 million seniors now. In 20 years, they're going to be 80. That's going to be almost 25% of the population.
You're not going to take away their Social Security.
It's very, very difficult to take that away. They have an amazingly powerful voice, as you know. And my first point and what I'd like to see is to motivate the younger people in this country to realize that if they really want to start to address this problem, they have to do it by becoming more focused and representing themselves with a powerful voice to offset that. Politicians will listen to a vocal and large voting bloc.